Welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is identity. And we're going to just talk about how we take on multiple identities, and a number of these identities don't really serve us. And in many cases, they're not even something that is part of our awareness. So today we're going to talk about identifying our identities and also how how we can actually be conscious in our choices about the identities that we take on and how that can positively impact our lives. But before we do that, let's just get settled in and take a minute or two to take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it and imagine your lungs filling with crisp, clean oxygen, just flooding your bloodstream and all of your cells and all of your organs with vitality and life energy. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any stress, allow yourselves to become present. Let's take another deep breath in through your nose. Hold it, and this time imagine sparkling white light just coursing through your body and into every molecule, every electron, lighting you up from the inside out. And as all those molecules connect with the world, allow yourself to expand into that connection and exhale any tension, any stress. And now let's just gently press our palms together, softly, softly, softly. Rub your fingers against your palms and allow the tickling and the tingling in your fingers and your palms to bring you present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, identity. This week, we've been talking a lot about making the invisible visible and things that we're not seeing necessarily. And one of the things that we don't necessarily have conscious awareness of is all the identities that we take on that shape our experience of life and the limits that we impose on ourselves without even realizing it. So, uh, one of the I yesterday I was talking about health trauma, and what I realized out of that too is that I have an identity, or maybe multiple identities, have had around my health, and particularly around asthma. I've had asthma most of my life, and the way that we speak these things, or I've had the symptoms that people call asthma most of my life. And so when we look at identity, particularly around health or around weight or around, well, so many things, we will say things like, I am asthmatic, I am diabetic, like as an identity. And the truth is that those are symptoms that we have, those are conditions that we have, or that we experience. These are experiences that we have. They're not who we are. And so when people say things like, I'm 300 pounds, or I'm I'm fat, it's like that's an identity. And it's not that you are 300 pounds, it's that your body weighs 300 pounds. It's not that you are fat as an identity, it is that your body has more weight in it on it than you desire, perhaps. So being specific about our awareness and our language about what we're taking on is really important for how we interact with our lives and with the experiences and of our lives as they present themselves. So if we look at me, for example, if I were to identify as an asthmatic, like who I am is I am an asthmatic, or I am um, not healthy. In my case, an identity that I had was I'm the healthiest sick person you'll know, which is kind of twisty because there's positive and not so positive all mixed up in that same identity, right? Like I have had health challenges, and here I am identifying with these health challenges. And by identifying with those health challenges or having them as part of an identity, what I do is I limit myself and or have limited in the past limited myself and my possibilities and my opportunities. And I think it's really interesting. I had a conversation with a family member a while ago who was talking about another family member who has extreme health issues. And they were saying that this person had come to terms with their lives, come to terms with their limitations. And I think that that it's really important to look at the limitations that we choose for ourselves and the motivations behind those limitations. I had a wonderful conversation with some artist friends, and we were able to look at the identity of starving artists. And so um, it's an archetype. The starving artist is an archetype that we kind of validate socially. And when a person who is producing magnificent creative works identifies as a starving artist because because of the social stereotype, what kind of constraints are they creating for themselves through that? You want to look at, if I imagine myself as a starving artist, I cannot succeed. I cannot find myself in a financially comfortable place because I'm a starving artist. And what else about a starving artist? I'm going to be creating suffering and struggle for myself because that's who I am. If I'm a starving artist, then obviously I need to be struggling. And this was actually a revelation for me. I've spoken about this before, but it's just so powerful. I had been doing some Joe Dispenza meditations, and in one of the meditations, he asked questions so that we could be, when we ask questions, our brain generates responses. And so one of the questions was, what would it be like if all your needs were met? And I realized that I had an identity around struggling and suffering. And having that identity around struggling and suffering meant by default that I could not possibly have all my needs met. All the work that I was doing with abundance and manifesting my dreams, as long as this identity of suffering and struggle, or identification with suffering and struggle, was present for me, or even believing that there was my voice sorry, even believing that there was merit in suffering and struggle, uh, elevating that as an important and valuable uh, trait, prevented me from access to abundance, because I could not have all my needs met if I were suffering and struggling. And so I think it's really important for us to look at the identities that we have taken on that are probably invisible and that really don't serve us. So with the I want to look at, for instance, the identity of survivor. Okay, because that actually was one of my identities for sure, is I'm a survivor. And that's actually where the struggle and the suffering came in. And so I know that there are many people who have triumphed over disease and over tremendous trauma and uh, like being a rape survivor, for instance, or being a cancer survivor. And there's a certain heroism for sure in in triumph over adversity. And I wonder if as we say things like I'm a cancer survivor, what we're invoking is the experience, not to deny it. I don't we'll look at the other side of this in a minute, but it's reinforcing in a way the cancer. It's kind of like when you say don't do that, what you're doing is you're commanding doing that, really, because the brain doesn't understand don't. In order to understand don't, you have to find out what the thing is that the don't is about. So it's like you're reinforcing it constantly. So in terms of being a cancer survivor, what what could it look like to be I am a health hero? You know, the words have a lot of power to them. And how about if in the identification we identify with something that is empowering in terms of moving us into the experiences that we desire? So I'm a health hero, perhaps, or I I am I am strong and independent. I am a powerful woman, for instance, in response to the being a rape survivor, because there is tremendous strength and heroism in overcoming these adversities, and I'm wondering if these certain identities, like identifying for me, um, for instance, to say that I have, that I'm a survivor of medical abuse, for instance, if I took on that identity, then I maintain my identity as a victim. So Hope says, I love that. Good morning. Hello, Hope. I know it's not morning for you, and welcome. I'm really glad you're here. And she says, I love that. I'm a health hero. Yes, because what we want to do is to celebrate our triumph, right? And not to reinforce our our challenge, you know, to not to be invoking the challenge, but to be invoking the celebration and the triumph. And these identities are really important because we we use them as a lens for our experience. And if I and I did for a long time in my life identify with being a victim, then I am creating a hierarchy where I'm less powerful than the victimizer. Do you understand? And so what if I invoke my power and my strength without having um, to continue the dynamic of for me it was of the victim experience. So I choose for myself to invoke my strength, invoke my sovereignty, my autonomy, my independence, my creativity. And so feel into these different identities, because so many of us, I don't imagine that there are any of us who have not experienced trauma of one sort or another. When we allow that trauma to define us as a trauma rather than triumph, then then I think we kind of keep ourselves bound to it in a way that keeps the victimization sort of perpetuating. So Danette says, yes, the victim mentality I keep seeing with people, including myself. It's something I'm changing. So congratulations for that, Danette. And the thing about the victim experience, again, speaking from personal experience, is the experience of powerlessness, the experience of of powerlessness is really what it's about. And so reclaiming our sovereignty, reclaiming our power is part of the triumph. It is the triumph. Like when we say we're a survivor of abuse, for example, what we're really saying is that not only did we survive, but we triumphed over that experience. And so by putting our identity into that triumph, just feel how different it is when you think of yourself as a victim, or you think of yourself as a hero, for instance, or heroine, or shiro, whatever you would like to call it. But when you feel into it, I guarantee you can feel the difference. I know that when I feel into victim, I contract. When I feel into triumph or celebration or heroism or being a hero, that feels expansive. Uh, and or a champion, it feels expansive. Now, on the other side of things, identity, we may have identities that, for all intents and purposes, look really positive and really empowering, and they can also be something that is doing brutality to us. For example, and I've spoken about this before too, but I have a number of clients who are high performers, and so with an identity, for example, of I am a high achiever, that can be empowering in a lot of ways, and it can also be a really brutal taskmaster. So if I am a high achiever, do I have room to stumble as I try new things? Because as a high achiever, I'm required, as part of that identity, to do things well. no matter what. And to have a definition of oneself that goes in the way of, I am always a high achiever. The always is the hammer. The always is the thing that will destroy us, because if I'm always a high achiever, I have no room for failure. And the way that we learn is through failing forward, really. Like, think of a little kid who's learning how to walk. They have many, many instances of quote unquote failing to walk as they're learning to walk, right? We don't expect, oh, well, as adults, unfortunately, many times we do expect to be able to do everything perfectly right out of the gate. And as a result, the frustration and the persistence that's required of learning something new, and the discomfort of not doing it well, whatever it is, in the process of learning how to do something, stops many of us from even trying in so many ways. Like, I'm too old to do that, I'm too old to learn that, I'm too this to do that, whatever, because of these identities that we have, and because we become averse to stumbling, skinning our knee or falling when we're maybe learning to roller skate or whatever. There's a learning process. And so with an identity of, I'm a high achiever, it has its dark side to it. And so maybe there's another more positive, forgiving identity, because one person in particular, this identity of, I always actually, this was one of their statements, I always create great results. Now that's tough. That's brutal, right? I always create great results. That word always is just a really dangerous word, because if I always expect myself to achieve great results, I'm completely setting myself up for disappointment, self-judgment, etc., etc. So what other kinds of identities might you have that could be tweaked in a way that serves you better in your life? Um, what places do you find that your identities are creating limitations for you? We talked this week about acknowledging your gifts, and if we oh, how about this one? I'm a good person. I'm a good person. So I'm a good person on the surface looks like that's a great identity, right? Well, what happens if you, as a good person, have thoughts that don't jive with your idea of what a good person should be? Does that make you not a good person? Do you then get to beat yourself up about not being a good person because you had some thoughts that weren't up to par for you? Um, what we want to look at is the identities that keep us embroiled in patterns that are self-destructive. And we could say, I think there's a lot of problem actually with or challenge around this notion of being a good person, because we don't, when we say I'm a good person, we don't necessarily dissect what that means and what the implied expectations are. So that's really the foundation of what the identity conversation is about, is that with these identities come many, many invisible and perhaps unconscious expectations. So if I'm a good person, that means that what? That I will be aware. Oh, okay. Here's another one along the idea of being a good person. Because I was thinking about environmental awareness. So I'm really into sustainability. So I have a lot of behaviors that I do in trying to be conscientious around the environment. If I identified as an environmentalist, then I have a lot of opportunities to be really, really intolerant of some of the behaviors that I don't really have a whole lot of choices about, or I have limited choices about. So, for instance, if I am an environmentalist, how far do I go? Is it okay for me to drive a car? Is it okay for me to purchase anything that is packaged in plastic? And I could extend that whole notion of the environmentalist identity to being a good person. Maybe being a good person is being environmentally responsible. So I think that I'm not saying that it is, I'm saying that maybe that would be part of my definition of what it means to be a good person. So when we say I'm a good person, I'm a good friend, I'm a whatever I am, let's look at the unspoken expectation behind that so that we can be more realistic and not be violent toward ourselves with expectations that as human beings we can't always meet. And again, there's that always word. So we want to be looking at I intend to, rather than I am, as we identify with. So these identities are constructs. They're really constructs, and they're constructs that we impose upon ourselves and on others without defining what the underlying expectations and meanings are. And looking at those expectations and meanings head on will enable us to become more free of these constructs. In other words, releasing these identities to be able to be more present to just living and expressing our authentic selves. So, for me, one of my greatest values is freedom. I mean, that's what leads me into the exploration of consciousness. It's what leads me in the it is my primary value, freedom. And when I speak freedom, for me what that means is freedom of mind, freedom of heart, freedom of soul. And that means for me also freedom from boxes, and identities are boxes. Like, we are so much more than all these identities. when we experience ourselves as an identity, we're putting ourselves in a box. And the truth is that we have a multitude of these identities that we identify with, and those are the boxes of our own choosing, consciously or otherwise. As we are able to free ourselves from those identities, we have greater permission then to be, and to be responsive to life and to our experiences. And so I invite you to look at the kinds of identities that you've taken on, and to look at where they expand you and where they restrict you, and whether they serve you or not, and to perhaps recreate those identities in ways, if you want to hold on to identities, if you're inclined, if you need to be identifying with certain things or ideas or experiences, then at least redefine those identities in ways that can serve you better. And I think that's it. I think that's it. So I love spending this time with you. I'm so grateful to you to be sharing these conversations, sharing in these musings. And I'm Mira Rubin. I'm here on the Core Connection on weekday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. Good morning, Carolyn. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. And I hope that you guys will check out the other awesome programming on the Enlightened World Facebook page. And I hope you'll join me again. I really, really appreciate this engagement with you, and sending lots and lots of love. Till next time.